or provisioning horses. So they come up, there's a tunnel that came up St Mary's Gate. Under here they'd be fed and water, then taken out. They didn't stable overnight, they just came down here to be provisioned. Let's go down this passage.
Did you take a photo of me before?
Yeah.
What was I doing?
I don't know.
What was I doing? Was I running?
What is it?
What hell is... No, oh my god! I don't like that at all.
Oh no. Harriet!
What's that right? I don't want to look at it.
Oh.
You alright?
Yeah, I just don't understand.
You don't understand?
No.
Anyway, good. I don't understand either. Never understood. Yeah, let's talk about her. She was a beautiful lady. Madame Malibran, she was called. She died when she was 28 in Manchester. She was the world's most famous opera singer at the time. She didn't, I don't think, intended to come to Manchester to die, but she did. She was Spanish by parentage, although she was brought up in Italy. And she was special as a singer from a very early age. She was spotted, really, maybe about 13 or 14. And then her father coached her, who was a trained opera singer himself. And she became known as the Nightingale of Europe. And by the age of 16, she was a singing sensation, touring Europe. At the age of 17, the dad thought, well, listen, we can conquer that emerging market of the States. So she went to the States. And she broke opera in a proper fashion in the States. And she was tremendously successful, but her dad, she was only 17, thought she's very beautiful. And there's all these rich men who are developing Manhattan. I'll marry her off to one of them and I'll get all the money. So he married her off to a man called Malibran. So Maria Garcia became Maria Malibran, hence Madame Malibran. And you could tell it was a marriage of love because she was 17 and he was 53. And very fat. And anyway, the next year he did something unforgivable, which he went bankrupt. So not only was she married to somebody she didn't like, but she then had to go out and sing for a supper. Beforehand she picked and chose which concert she wanted to sing at. Now she had to go out and make the money. Didn't like it, so after a year she did the runner and came back to Europe. Somehow got the marriage dissolved in Paris, probably legally. There was no doubt that she'd consummated the marriage. And then she shacked up with another guy called Berriot, who was a Belgian violinist, and they had the perfect storm of a Latin, passionate, artistic relationship. They would shout and scream at each other, and the next minute they'd be in each other's arms, cooing. And they became very famous for this. They relocated to Brussels, where they got married. Then, meanwhile, Manchester had gone from those 20,000 people, like I said, to in 1836, when this happens, 300,000 or so. Didn't think it had a reputation for anything but making things, or money. So it was like cotton industry, or heavy engineering, or money. So they wanted a cultural reputation. So they did the Manchester Music Festival of 1836. So because they were loaded by now, the city was, they decided to get the biggest stars. So it had to get Madame Malibran, because she was the biggest star in the world. So she came up to Manchester, and she did one performance in the old assembly rooms. But although the audience thought they'd never heard singing like this, a lot of the cast with her thought she looked ill. And they inquired about this, and Malibran, Berriot, the husband, said she'd fallen off a horse whilst riding in London in a park on the way up. And Malibran herself kept pretty quiet on it, but a lot of the female cast thought she was heavily pregnant, which would prove to be the case. But she was weak. The following day she went for a rehearsal in the cathedral, and during that rehearsal she collapsed. She was taken back to a hotel, and she was fading rapidly. Her husband came along and looked at her and sat with her, and everything thought, as he should do. And then the doctors came along and prescribed a diet of oysters and stout, which would cure her, which is a weird way to give Guinness and oysters, that's the remedy. And she continued to fade. And then Berriot did something unforgivable, which actually took a long time to forgive him over. He did a runner. He left as well. He left before she died, about an hour or two before she died. And as all the newspapers said, how can a husband, if he was a gentleman, leave his wife or his lady in her most desperate hour of need? Manchester hated him. It seems he'd done a runner back to Brussels to make sure when she did die, he could get all the estate and make sure he had all the money. So he left, Manchester disliked him, there was the biggest funeral we'd ever had, thousands of people lined the streets, and she was buried in the cathedral with all pomp and circumstance. Passing this building, which at this time was not the Barton Arcade, it was the Red Lion pub underneath here, that's why it's a slightly different configuration here, with lower ceilings and everything. And so they passed this building, and Berrio had played here in the music room. It was quite a posh pub and a well-to-do pub, this. He played in the music room, which was on the second floor, which of course is now gone because the whole upper levels have disappeared. And the minute they'd buried her, biggest funeral we'd ever had, a letter came from Brussels saying, "Can I have my wife's body back, please? We need to mourn her closer to where the family are." Manchester said, "No way, you left her. How dare you even ask? You're a cad, you're a bounder, you're not a gentleman. No way, no way, no way." So it became a 3-month legal battle. So the lawyers made a bit of money as usual. At the end of that process, they still weren't getting anywhere, and it took Marion Malibran's mother to come to Manchester and plead for the return of her body to the organising committee of the festival, at which point they relented. She was crying, she was weeping, and the compromise they came to was they'd only sign the body to her and not to her husband, because he was still deemed an ungentleman. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, on December the 20th, 1836, they dug her up from the cathedral. She was buried inside the cathedral walls. And they did it at that early hour, so that nobody would be, as they say, excited in their emotions in the streets. In other words, nobody would cause a riot or think something untoward's going on, or witchcraft or whatever. So they dug her up, and then they had a problem. So they took her out to the edge of the churchyard, and either something had gone wrong or they'd not done it. No transport was there to take Madame Malibran away. There was no carriage or conveyance. So they were a bit stuck. So the church people said, "Well, you're not keeping her here. We didn't even want to dig her up anyway. Hide her, find a property, get her away, hide her, and wait for a carriage or conveyance or organise one." The only place they knew around here was the Red Lion, because Berrio had played here. So they brought the corpse, in the coffin of course, to the door, and about 5 o'clock in the morning they knocked on the door, and the landlord came down and said, "What's that?" And they said, "That's the coffin of the most famous opera singer in the world, and can we store it here for a bit?" And originally, to begin with, they said, "No way." But then he relented because he realised they were in a bit of a state. He said, "Well, you're not putting her in the bar, for obvious reasons." So they bought her down to Double Undercroft, and they stored her down here. She was only here for about 4 hours, and then she was taken back to Brussels, where she was buried with all the pomp and circumstance. In Manchester, though, the stories started to crop up about what was happening. So we have to go into the actual chamber she was stored in now. So follow me this way. Let's turn these torches off, folks. Let me read it. Just to get there. Right, okay, so there's a great Manchester newspaper at the time called the Manchester Courier, which is a right laugh at minute, and reports things in a much very modern way. You can hear that from John Rowland's from the Chetham's Library. And so in the Courier it said, "What a cruel circumstance it was that a lady so beautiful and with such a distinguished voice and deportment should end up her days in Manchester in the sub-basement of a mere public house, stuck amongst, as they say, the hams and the sherries and the bottles of wine. But curiouser, perhaps, again, is the instances where people on Red Lion Lane, which is where the Barton Arcade is, and Deansgate have heard singing rising from the depths. Beautiful singing beyond match. Indeed, on one occasion, the town watch were observed. One lying prostrate on the floor in Red Lion Lane. One saying, 'Can you hear her? Can you hear her?' There she is. What is it joining in a minute, yeah? Good. Yes, Madame Malibran. She's now come back and she's got a full orchestra with her, if you've noticed. Yes, cunning she is. But the story's a genuine one. All these stories are genuine one, in that I've got a real basis. Now, we could go on with
Wait,
these, but unfortunately, time's limited, so we're going to have to move back to the daylight part of the world and leave these spooky places.
Shall